So this is a little video for three Rachmaninoff pieces, which I would thoroughly recommend. First is an easy song without obviously the singer, but it's not a transcription or anything. And that's in the major key. It's G major, and then that's followed by the minor key of the fifth prelude of Opus 23, which is G minor. So they fit well together, and then to follow that, another major key, a flattened major on the D flat major, 18th Paganini variation by Rachmaninoff. So the keys work very well, and it also follows the historical the dates that they composed. So I think the first one was around 1890. It was a really early one, 1894 or so, if I'm not mistaken. And then I think that Rachmaninoff's fifth prelude was written before maybe all of the others in that Opus 23, if I'm not mistaken. I think it was actually written in 1899, but it was published in 1901 or so. Anyway, that's right. Yes, I think that's right. Actually, something along those lines. I know that he had already written the famous C sharp minor prelude, but he also, and that was part of his first set of I can't remember what they were called. Morceau de piano, I think. But then the fifth one was written after that, but before, I think, the rest, for some reason, before the rest of the set of Opus 23. Maybe I may be mistaken, but there's some good books on Rachmaninoff. One by Leder and Bertenson, who were Russian, around the time, I think, of Rachmaninoff, if I'm not mistaken. I think they were the first biographers. I think they have some, or at least one of those authors has a connection to the Russian sort of schools or conservatoires that Rachmaninoff was linked to, if I'm not mistaken. And then the other good book I've read is by Max Harrison, which is called Rachmaninoff's Works, Recordings, and or something like that. And there's a third thing: Works, Somethings, and Recordings. That's a very good book as well. So yeah, but anyway, that song was written as part of the song which is called Ostrovok, which means small island, was written, as I say, before the turn of the century, and I think the fifth prelude was as well. It's a nice song, but it's not his greatest by any means. However, as I think Max Harrison says in the book, which I read, it's like he calls it a tone picture, which is quite a good way of describing it. It's a bit, you can sort of see maybe the influence of Debussy, perhaps. Debussy was in another book I'm reading about Tchaikovsky by Brown. It's the last volume about Tchaikovsky and his magisterial, I think, at least 3-volume work on Tchaikovsky. He says how how Nadezhda von Meck is, I think she has as her tutor Debussy, if I'm not mistaken, and she gives to Tchaikovsky, or she shows to Tchaikovsky one of his works, and Tchaikovsky is quite nonplussed from memory. But interesting, because Debussy is such a great composer. It's interesting that he didn't see much in Debussy's admittedly early work, because he was working as a tutor for Nadezhda von Meck, if I'm not mistaken. Anyway, I wonder if Rachmaninoff, by the time Rachmaninoff wrote this, would have known any of Debussy's works. But I think that Debussy came sort of after, or was influenced by Satie. I think that Satie was the originator of that sort of impressionistic school of piano writing. But that's the way I see it. But they were both about the same time, so I think that Debussy and Satie wrote, I think, in the same year. So Gnos, how do you pronounce it? Gnos. How do you pronounce it? Let's just find out how you pronounce it. Gnossiens. Okay, so his Gnossiens. I think he wrote that the same year as the Arabesque of Debussy, the number one anyway of Debussy. The one that goes. I don't know if it's an Arabesque. The one that goes sort of. That sort of one. Yeah, he wrote that. I think it's the same year as Satie, but as Gnossien, number one. But Satie, I think, had already written a considerable amount by then. Anyhow, this is the Rachmaninoff trio that I like to group together. The keys follow each other well, as I said, and also it's historical, as I said. So the last one is the 18th variation without orchestra, much better than any version, but it does require practice, because with Rachmaninoff you forget so easily. It's very strange. I think there are two things, not being an expert, of course, but to my mind, there are two things with Rachmaninoff. One is you got to look very carefully at the score, because it's often you only get these versions from the internet, which are the full orchestra and all that. So it's tiny print. But even when it's normal print, you've got to still look very carefully for each note, because the notes change by one semitone here and there, and all the time, and it's very, very confusing. And you've really got to search very carefully. As I think this person who has a brilliant channel called Born to Rack says, once, however, you've got the Rachmaninoff under your fingers, it's like I think he calls it a train track. Once you've got the train track, then you don't forget it, or something along those lines. He speaks like about that aspect, and that's true for sure. But the fact is, with me anyway, that even though it's true that once I've got it in my head, then it's difficult to sort of forget it in the short term. In the long term, it certainly is possible to forget it. So with me, Rachmaninoff, you've got to keep on practicing as well. And so this 18th variation is certainly like that. I thought it was quite an easy piece, but it turned out that I forgot it after a while. And then you got to go back to the score and all that, and it's tiny notes, and it's a real chore. So I think the best way is to keep on practicing Rachmaninoff. The G minor prelude is something which is sort of it's quite easy to remember, because it's quite simple. and the notes don't change too much. But that 18th variation, for example, is with all the chords which do change from one measure to the next. I think that's something which is, for example, also with the concertos. So I know a little bit of the second concerto, and I used to know a little bit of the third concerto. All those chords, such amazing chords that he's able to write, but I think they're quite easy to forget after a while. Even though in the short term, yeah, there's that thing about once you've got the train track, then you just go and you don't forget it. But anyway, so here we go. Here's my recommendation for a good trio of Rachmaninoff pieces that I think go well together. As I say, I've forgotten this last one, so I'll try to just bear with me, please. Don't go away. I start with the song anyway. My hands are too cold because it's freezing in this garage. A good workman always blames his tools. So I'll stop this video now. There's a good trio to learn to do as a trio. That's as a triptych. Bye bye. See you next time. Don't miss the next video. You will be disappointed if you do.